Hey folks, Kilt-Man here. Kilt-Man at your services. How are you all? Hope you're all doing very, very well. Yes, I know there's a lens flare right there bisecting my cranium. At the moment, I don't mind it being there because it ties into what we're going to be, well, discovering. I'm going to read one of my short stories out from my second award-winning book, Twisted Tales Volume 2. Now, those of you who've been keeping up with the latest videos will know that I tried to read this story out only recently, and outside forces conspired against me and ruined the whole thing. What you don't know is I tried another time yesterday to do it, and the cough, which I've managed to beat down for months now, came back. It resurfaced. And I got about 10 minutes into it and cough, had to stop. So we're going to try again without a big lengthy preamble. It's from my second book, Twisted Tales Volume 2. It's called Monument. I agonised over whether to call it Monument or Citadel. It's up to you which title you think would be best. I know why I chose Monument, and yeah, I'm not going to waste too much time before starting it. The first paragraph is like 2 sentences long, and I don't like it. I'll say this right from the word go. I do not like it because, well, I'll read it out to you. This story, by the way, is told in a sort of semi-fable, semi-epic poem style. Semi, because it's not quite in that vernacular, but I can't find where's the bloody story? Where is it? I found it. Right. It's a fantasy, but it's told over certain years. But it's done in sort of Nordic saga, sort of overview sort of style. But here's the first paragraph. Throughout the ages, there have been peaceful times and there have been chaotic times. This happened during one of the darkest. Can you see why I don't like that? I've already told you there's been peaceful times and chaotic times. And now this happened in a third sort of time, a darkest time. To me, it doesn't ring true. I don't like it. And I remember at the time, this is written back in I think the latter stages of 1999. I was still in the Marines at the time as well. I didn't like how it was. But people who've read the book have told me that, no, it works. It's got that sort of foreshadowing and irony as to how the story transpires. So, okay, I'm not sure I thought about that at the time. And I did struggle with it. I thought, this doesn't work. It doesn't ring true. I've given you 2 options and then throw in a third one out the blue. So anyway, we'll start it now. Music in the background is James Horner's score for Troy. I don't know why. It just is. Seemed perfectly apt. And all the stuff behind me is the most apt things I could find for this sort of story. So, are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Let's have a quick swig of tea. And let's hope I don't dry up and the throat close over and then the cough begins. Keep your fingers crossed. Throughout the ages, there have been peaceful times and there have been chaotic times. This happened during one of the darkest. The invasion had gone well. All resistance on the shores had been quashed with supreme and deadly ease, the marauding force rolling over the defenders as though they hadn't been there at all. Then, fueled with insatiable bloodlust, the victorious army surged inland like a plague and swept across it, laying waste to every township, every village and farmstead in their path. They held aloft the vanquished chieftains from each as an example to any that dared to oppose them, and pressing ever onward, the dark horde spread out like a gauntlet, soon encompassing the entire nation in a steel grip of death and butchery. I'm going to struggle with bits of this because this book was printed and published by a really naff publisher. So it's not, you can't read Kilt-Man. No, they printed it with big gaps in front of it, between the words, and commas in the wrong places. They did it really badly wrong. This is a pre-publishing copy, like a temp copy anyway. So anyway, at the gates of the capital they halted, drawing up their mighty force of barbarians until the vast city was completely surrounded. Quaking within their stronghold and realizing that salvation was unattainable, the doomed inhabitants sent out emissaries to talk terms of their capitulation. Surrender seemed their only course of action. From the battlements they watched as their men of peace were slaughtered and crucified upon the grassy slopes outside the walls, and then screamed and begged for mercy as the ungodly swarm roared down the hills towards them and stormed the citadel with all the fire and fury of the legions of hell itself. Not a nice predicament to be in. And when the madness and the carnage had finally calmed, the survivors were herded together and thrown en masse into the dungeons deep beneath their own ruined city. For a week and a day, the conquerors sat amid the rubble, contemplating their success. They gorged themselves on the meat and wine of those they had subjugated, boasted of their individual feats of combat, and toasted their masterful tacticians. But then they looked about at the true horror of their victory: the blasted citadel, the trampled crops, and the corpses piled as high as the crumbling ramparts. The people they had defeated had been the wealthiest they had fought, their capital a glittering prize on the map. And was this blighted husk all they had to show for their hard campaigning? Was disease, famine, and the bloody shambles of a city to be all the spoils that war had to offer them? It left a sour taste in the mouth to look upon the once proud land, now just a rancid corpse. The victorious king took counsel with his aides in the pulverized remains of the throne room, and between them they despaired at the havoc they had wrought so indiscriminately. "We must move on," said one, "for we cannot be beaten." "We should rejoice," said another, "for we have toppled a kingdom." But the king would heed neither suggestion, and he paced the cracked marble tiles in a sulk, his mind throbbing with dark thoughts. He was tired of fighting. Who knew what lay beyond the next mountain range, the next sea? Somewhere out there was a people and a nation that he couldn't crack and overrun. He had no desire to push his luck too far, and to prove that theory. See, it gets the words mixed up at the end of a line, puts the hyphen in the wrong place. Desire to push his luck too far and prove that theory in the blood of his own clan. Then finally he reached a decision. "We must build," he declared, "for without an empire we are nothing." It was true. They had fought and won, and now the king had grown weary of such wild pursuits. "But sire," they argued, "there are bigger, wealthier kingdoms yet to be snatched," his warring counsellors advised him. "Why stay here in this desolate wasteland? What did this graveyard have to offer them now?" But the king wouldn't listen. He had made up his mind to remain, and that then became the law of his people. "I want a city to rival the palaces of the gods themselves," he ordered. "A vast and gleaming realm, the like of which has never graced the earth. A towering edifice that will serve as the pinnacle of our creed's greatest achievements for the rest of time. We will have no need of further conquests," he argued, "for nothing beyond our dominion will be worthy of our toils. Nothing will even scratch the surface of our blazing new kingdom, our paradise, in comparison. This new structure will be huge and immortal, as shall all those that dwell within its golden walls." "But sire, such an epic undertaking will surely exact a heavy toll. It will take years to oversee its constructions, decades. Our people are travellers. We move on and on, taking all that we need along the way. To settle like this would not be our custom. We will wither and perish in apathy and indulgence." Cheers, y'all. Ominous tones there. The king listened and nodded. He understood the risks and the change to his people's livelihood, but cared little. He had his dream, and he would not be swayed from seeing it through to fruition. "Our city will be the envy of the world," he said reverently. "The very universe. It will be everlasting." "It'll be a target for our enemies," spoke one. "Bah, it'll be folly," muttered another. But by dawn the next day, the two dissenters had been quartered and their limbs placed at 8 points radiating 20 miles out from the centre of the sacked kingdom. "These," ordained the king, "will be the 8 boundaries of our new city, our new home." The heads he kept a little longer, deciding in time that one should That the one should be preserved and placed atop the highest spire as a lookout for the enemies he so feared, whilst the other he would have laid beneath the first foundation stone of what would be his jewelled courtyard, so that he could forever walk over him and survey his magnificent folly. It's so hard to read your own stuff. You know, it's difficult. But there was a problem. A big one. His race were destroyers, not creators. In their clumsy paws, tools were little more than weapons. Plans were hatched for war and not renaissance. Those he assigned to engineer his idyll ended up fighting amongst themselves, and any designs they concocted lacked coherence. The king stalled his anger and demanded that an architect be found and brought before him. Scour the land and find a man with the power to fashion substance from dreams. More time went by, and the search for one with such knowledge proved fruitless. The foundations begun in haste crumbled in the first storm, and many of his proudest warriors were crushed beneath them. It seemed that his counsel had been right, and he cursed fate for its devilment. And then one day a slave informed him that he had the defeated nation's greatest architect languishing in the foulest dungeon beneath his own very feet. With a snarl, the king had the wretch hauled up from the sunken depths of his misery and brought before his council. Little more than a bag of bones, the prisoner knelt before his glowering captors. I want Byzantine towers of crystal and sparkling gemstone, the king informed him. Walls of stone and iron, advised the councillor for defence, at least 5 feet thick. A palace of mirrors and halls lined with gold, waxed the king. Canals bridged with bronze and a radiant plaza of sapphire. A molten lake a mile wide all around the city to withhold attackers, pressed the concerned councillor, and turrets of impregnable steel 100 feet high for all lookouts. But the king would hear none of these practicalities. He was too busy moulding shape from his own fantasies. Marble domes that harnessed the beauty of the stars and statues of mighty agate. In my likeness that pierced the clouds like spears. I want trees of silver and streets paved with all the coins of the world. Bathhouses walled of stained glass and fountains of wine and ambrosia. Defensive trenches and barracks for our troops. A training ground. An arena. Gardens, galleries, overhead walkways, a colossal tapestry depicting the king and his courageous people laying siege to and then rebuilding the trampled city, and more, much more. The list of demands went on well into the night, and the poor architect was humbled at the sheer scale of the undertaking. But he dared not argue, and he did not venture his opinions upon his new master. He merely listened and nodded. You will construct for me the greatest kingdom the world has ever seen. You will forge my Avalon, a monument to the brilliant mind within my skull. The king rose from the battered, cracked and blood-stained throne he had inherited, and tottered with the giddy breathlessness of his unfolding dream. There were tears in his eyes at the very thought of it, and like a madman he snatched at them and held out his hands to show the builder the limpid pools they contained. Diamonds, he said simply. As far as the eye can see, craft me a world so precious and rare that the deities themselves, when they come to visit, will fall to their knees in awe. Another breather. You can perform all this, can you not? Quizzed the other councillors, and they gripped the unfortunate minion and thrust him against the peeling wall, as behind them the obsessed king lyricized his way around the blasted chamber. The prisoner nodded. Of course I can. It is my trade, my skill, and it would be an honour to build for your king. Your king, they corrected him, and then hauled him towards a great hole that had been smashed in the wall during the battle. Through it they showed him the ruins of his once inspiring city, and the juvenile attempts they had made to restore it. Transform it, slave, they commanded him, and you shall have your freedom back. The prisoner knew he had no choice at all, and that the infidels would surely never keep their word, but he bowed and kissed their feet anyway, thanking them for their mercy and charity, until they tired of his fawning and had him flung out to begin his designs. They didn't notice a smile on his dirty face. Let me do that again. They didn't notice the smile on his dirty face as he was escorted from the decrepit royal chamber. The architect requested a month to plan its construction, and he was given rooms and materials with which to model and experiment. Under armed guard, he walked the site, stopping to sit and visualise many times along the way. His notes and sketches were seized by the king and his council at the end of every day, pored over and disseminated. But the designs and ideas they contained were beyond their understanding. The king would demand an audience with his builder to discuss progress, and the slave would be courteous and reassuring. They listened to his aspirations and the mathematics he would employ to see them through to completion. With uncomprehending ears, their brains more accustomed to the mechanics of warfare. It was clear to the slave that so long as he gave them exactly what they wanted, he would be in sole charge of the operation, and that, in effect, he would control their legions. Were it not for his vital instruction, they would be helpless and blind. Soon the labouring began. He was commissioned men from the ranks, all brawn and stamina, to lug massive blocks of stone from the quarries the architect had set up. Parties of raiders were sent out to pirate and pillage foreign shores, returning with cargoes of gold, silver and diamond. And to celebrate the laying of the foundations, the king had his armies, shields and swords studded with gems and precious stones, their armour gilded. Still manacled, the architect knelt beside the king as he addressed his troops one morning, and had to suppress a chuckle at the ridiculous sight of their raised shield salute. Had to suppress a chuckle at the ridiculous sight of their raised shield salute, their swords and battle axes thrust triumphantly into the air. The bejewelled weaponry twinkled like stars in the night sky, and the king proclaimed, You see the power we wield? We command all the colours of the rainbow." Work began on the tapestry, all the women folk stitching and embroidering as though their very lives depended upon it, which of course they did. Thankfully, as this was underway, the king was kept busy posing for them as they struggled to capture his mighty image, and this meant that the architect could oversee the builders he instructed without the interference of his master. He watched the inlaying of crystal walls, the raising of iron platforms and the polishing of miles of golden balustrades. He supervised the erection of statues and giant obelisks at the 8 boundaries of the octagonal domain that were varnished with exquisite lacquers from distant shores, the digging of emerald-filled canals and subterranean chambers of jasper, agate and zircon. He directed the emplacement of glass roofs over mirrored pits of opal and moonstone. Trinkets and brooches were woven into the structures, so that even the most mundane of outhouses became a work of art. One day a councillor asked him why no position for a temple had been stipulated, and, afraid he might receive a swift beating for his untoward flippancy, the architect nevertheless replied, "A temple? What need have you of a temple when the entire city will be a shining beacon to the gods?" Crafty, hey? The councillor's eyes narrowed, and after a moment of realisation, as he scanned the glowing realm rising from the dust around him, he began to laugh. "That's right, slave," he said. "Our king has thought of everything, has he not?" Work had begun in the harshness of winter, and as the season started to mellow, the architect advised the use of canopies across the developing city to keep the heat from the backs of the thousands of toilers below. The king did not like the idea of shadows swallowing the lustre and sheen of his realm, but when the sweat oozed from beneath his crown, he finally relented, and presently huge tarpaulins were hoisted. At night they were rolled back, and the king would climb his podium, that grew higher and more ornate every day, and watch the glittering sea of jewels burning beautifully under the moonlight. Against the battlements, his epic tapestry was lit up in the reflection of the stars, and although the pictures of the king in his fighting prowess bore little resemblance to him since he had forsaken his warring ways, he still felt imperious and indomitable. It was good to see his people engaged, one and all, in the wonderful construction, unified with a common goal and purpose. He took heart from their strenuous endeavours and made sure that their lust for blood was appeased in weekly sacrifices of prisoners dredged up from the dungeons. These he permitted to look one last time upon the glory that had once been theirs, and then he had them put to death in games for the gratification of the masses. He made the architect witness these games as well, so that he wouldn't forget that he too was a prisoner. And the architect, for his part, took great delight in the occasional accident. Read that again. And the architect, for his part, took great delight in the occasional accident that he orchestrated. The clumsy placing of a lethal shaft of alexandrite, the overbalancing of a rising platform of bronze, a furbisher found drowned in a vat of golden paint, a dungeon keeper smelted when the contents of a hot oil cauldron drained away through secret pipes and tunnels. It was tit for tat, and the king and his council remained none the wiser to the slave's own little games. On and on it went, day in, day out. A year passed, then another, and then a third year of relentless toil. Every summer the massive canopies were stretched even further across the roof of the realm to protect the workers from the heat. Presently, magnificent spires ripped against the fabric of the clouds, and great crystal arches spanned the dominion like the legs of a colossus. It was truly breathtaking to behold the patterns they traced across the sky. When the king spied birds sitting on the ornamental spires, When the king spied birds sitting on the ornamental tiers, he had them caught in nets and covered over with liquid silver, polished up and then ultimately replaced as a permanent addition to the many sculptures and decorations that populated every paving wall and tower. When will she be completed, slave? He asked. Soon, your majesty, King replied, very soon. A river to the north was diverted and its waters allowed to fill the canals that crisscrossed the city. Rubies and other gems ignited these channels like fish born of a treasure trove, and workers often felt bewitched by the view they gave, and sat spellbound along the banks. In time, the warriors had composed ballads alluding to the fantasy world they seemed to inhabit, and the architect listened to them sing as they worked. Occasionally he would accompany them with the clinking of his chains. When, slave? Asked the king, more often as days went by and the sun climbed higher in the sky for the onset of a fourth summer. When can we throw back the canopy and unveil our paradise? Excuse me. The architect knew full well that he had gone as far as he could go. Under starlight, he took the king on a grand tour of the city, pointing out each and every feature he had been asked to deliver. And once they were done, he fell before him in supplication. Your Majesty, I have created and built everything you wanted. I beg you now to look about you and find something I may have missed from your grand scheme. The king and his council compiled a checklist, and everything upon it they managed to tick off. Everything is there, sire, said his attendants. Everything seems to be in place. Slave? Asked the king, his voice quivering with anticipation. The architect looked up from his gleaming yellow floor and into the maddest eyes in the kingdom. They shone above all else, burning with the most infernal of obsessions. The architect nodded. Then we are finished, sire. Your kingdom is complete. Oh, please, God help us. Let the cough not return fully. We ain't got too far to go. It took another week before the festivities had properly finished. A parade would It took another week before the festivities had been properly finalised. A parade would circumnavigate the realm. Trumpeters would serenade the heavens. His entire army would turn out in all their regalia, and the people would rejoice. At a given signal, the canopies would be withdrawn, and the city would be unveiled for all the world to see. Where once screams had reigned supreme, there was now a sound of laughter and children singing. The warrior race had become transcended. They were nomads no more. At last they had a place to call their own. What matter that they had stolen it and rebuilt it from the blood of the original occupants? It was home now, and no one, politician, barbarian or otherwise, could ever take it from them. Their society would never die. It would prosper and become the envy of all civilization. But what of me, your majesty? Asked the slave. And what of my companions in their cells? The smile on the monarch's face never touched his eyes, his insanity remaining undiluted. You, my friend, the forger of dreams, of this, my monument, shall give the signal for the city roof to be peeled back, and then you will see how great my people are that your kind could be so easily vanquished. What a twat. Freedom, sire. After the ceremony, you can do as you please, slave. So long as it is outside of the city walls, you are to be banished from my kingdom. The architect was bewildered. He would not be allowed to stay after all he had done. This land is now my land, and this city is for my people. They built it, they gave their lives for it, and from tomorrow onwards they will live as angels within it. Sire, what of my brethren, my friends? They shall be put to death, and thus eradicated from my domain. It will be so. Take heart that you will not be among their number. The council voiced their agreements and banged their golden goblets on the golden table. All around him the slave saw greedy eyes inflamed with gold, and then he smiled. Thank you, your majesty, for your kindness and your mercy. Gladly I will give the signal. So a little break there. I say it's written in a fable-like style. A grand Odyssey sort of overview. Let's continue. Much to his surprise, the architect was not escorted as he picked his way to the top of the hill outside the city. With a sigh of exhaustion, he drew himself up and faced the sprawling metropolis he had constructed in freedom. There they were, all of them, the enemy, the conquerors, the takers of his land, and the disease that had poisoned his people. He saw them in their hundreds and thousands, teeming along the battlements and the ramparts like excited ants as they pranced beneath the great canopy, waiting for the moment. He looked to the sky and gazed deep into its bright blueness. The first time he had stood unsheltered in the daylight since the building had begun 4 long years ago. He held a hand over his blinking eyes and watched as the sun rose above the mountains, and then, when it had almost gained the ascendance of midday, he moved to the basket he had brought with him, inside of which was kept a golden eagle. He released the catch on the basket and threw back the lid, with a violent surge the fabulous bird lifted from its cage and took to the air. He watched as it soared high into the bluest sky. The summer had yet painted, and then swooped down into the valley and towards the hulking stronghold. That was the signal. The king's lookout shouted down to the trumpeters on that gilded ramparts, and immediately they struck up the royal fanfare, and the women folk in the vast courtyard below began to dance and sing, moving almost as one across the enamelled victory mosaic, like coloured beads rolling around a pale chessboard. Flags were raised from every tower and turret, every sparkling roof, and from all the battlements. Coloured paper fluttered in the bright sunlight. Courtiers harangued strong men dressed in tiger skins, and, grunting and groaning, they began to work the wheel that wound the tarpaulin back in, peeling back the skin of the city. Held aloft on his spangled hand carriage by numerous attendants, the king started to laugh out loud at the garish spectacle taking place around him, and even reached out with his own fattened fingers as though to catch the falling petals of gold and silver, crimson and turquoise. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined he would behold such splendour, such dazzlement, and all in his name too. But still, this was not enough. He wished to see more. "Take me to the podium," he commanded his servants. "Take me higher. I must go higher." They trudged awkwardly up the marble ramp, struggling under the weight, and once on the sequined walkway, he demanded to be lowered so that he could climb the winding path himself. His servants, though loyal, did not desire to see such wondrous sights as would be afforded from the king's own private vantage point. He gathered up his robes and hurried along the path of shells and gemstones, one ring-festooned hand gripping the ivory wall. Above him the world seemed to be opening as the canopy slowly trawled across the sky, whilst below the great shadow it cast revealed his people cavorting in celebration like a swirling rainbow on fire in an iridescent sea. When he paused to catch his breath, he thought of them as little patterns slowly uncoiling in the midst of an even greater, more intricate design. Their voices carried on the breeze of flapping flags, lilting and glorious. It's only a few more pages. Gotta have some water now. For the first time since conquering this land, he felt truly as powerful as the Almighty. Did he not have control over the elements Had he not created a paradise? Look how it shines, he thought. Look at the magic I have made. Yet still he climbed, higher and higher, desperate to reach the pinnacle before the canopy was fully failed, and stand atop his gleaming tower. Oh, you've got to be joking. So that he may survey the complete majesty of his realm. He would see as far as 8 distant points, the 8 points to which he had scattered his dissenters, beyond mountains, rivers and valleys. He believed nothing else could exist beyond his dominion. Nothing that mattered anyway. Onward he climbed, his legs unaccustomed to such exercise after so long without a war, and when they eventually failed him and he stumbled to the jewel-carved floor, he dragged himself along on his hands and knees, wheezing. I'll cough every paragraph now, to punctuate them. From his hill in the distance, the architect saw the figure of the robed monarch hauling himself around the curved column, clawing his way to the top. By a curious magnification caused by the glass and the reflection of the diamonds in the building, he could see quite clearly the overblown proceedings, and he stood, proud of his skill and mastery over men and materials, and watched as the enemy whipped themselves into a frenzy of almost religious fervour. Then he looked again to the heavens. It was indeed a fine summer's day, not a cloud in sight from horizon to horizon. But nothing was so fine as his creation. The city filled the valley with its own supernatural conflagration, a bedazzling edifice. It looked as though all the stars of the universe had crashed to earth and rolled as one into this cleft of land. As the canopy unwrapped from around the summit of the podium, and a great sheaf of light spilled down to illuminate it, the king thought that he was scaling an enormous crown that had driven itself up from the ground. His crown. He reached the top and fell against the diamond rail, his chest heaving. Already the heat from the sun had begun to warm the thick glass flooring he rested upon. Composing himself, he saw down inside the column, for it was hollow like a tube, and the height from which he gaped made him dizzy. Like a multicoloured tunnel, its round walls seemed to spin before the king, ignited by a million cat's eyes of azure blue. His hands splayed out on the glass floor as he watched his own rotund silhouette cascade down the tube before his blaring eyes and keep on falling. Such wild delights. He must address his people. The star people who had harnessed the colours of the world above and below. He was their lord, their saviour. He stood and took hold of the scintillating rail. The canopy was almost completely rewound, and the pulleys and winches that controlled it growling like the first rumbling breath of the city as it awoke to its first dawn. On the grassy slope yonder, the slave appeared to him as a shimmering mirage, seemingly larger than normal, given ethereal might by the tricks of light and perspective displayed by his chromed city. The architect was dancing and rolling about the hill like a drunk, the efforts of his construction evidently having driven him mad. But the king did not care much for the obscene way in which he seemed to taunt him, flaunting his newfound freedom so. He decided that once the festivities were over, he would send out a party to drag the wretch back so that he could enjoy his greatest work from the confines of his own cell. All over again. What a bastard. The canopy was anchored back into place on huge struts of ivory, and the full glory of the city coruscated around him. He felt like he had climbed the largest icicle in the wildest fjord imaginable. Everything glittered and shone. The world had become a mighty sea of glass, radiating from itself the deepest frosting of blue and the purest of white gloss. He shouted down to the spinning masses below, and as one serpentine mob, they raised their heads and roared their appreciation and devout love of their lord and keeper, the star people. We're going to get there, folks. We're going to get there. It took 4 years to build this city. I'm sure I can get through this. He held out his arms, turning in a circle around his podium so as to view all of the sparkling children amassed beneath the column. The crowd cheered in return, and the king's army commenced their ritual salute, bringing up their golden shields to their breasts and driving their bejewelled swords into the air. At that precise moment, the slave on his hill ceased his dancing and quickly turned away from the glowing metropolis, diving to the ground and burying his face in the earth. This was the very thing he had been waiting for, and he'd known all along that the fools wouldn't let him down. The salute, their arrogant, proud act of self-adulation, was the time-honoured symbol of their tribe's power and strength, and now also their ultimate undoing. Why? "My people," exclaimed the king, "you are truly the children of the stars. Let there be light." And there was indeed light. As the king himself had asked for, all the power of the sun harnessed 1,000-fold within the reflections captured in the upturned and blazing shields, a ring of phosphorescence that in turn kicked off a chain reaction of soul-scorching brilliance from every polished and gleaming surface, every trinket, gem and precious ornament that comprised the realm they had crafted. The whole city became fused into one enormous halo, filled from the furthest most rampart to the slightest back street with searing bolts of hot lightning that forked with incandescent venom in every conceivable direction. The king had only one split second in which to view the spectral fairness he commanded before the raging spikes of illumination melted the eyes from his diluted skull and fried the brain beneath his fizzing crown. His final shriek of disbelieving agony as he clapped scorched black hands to his steaming head turned to a whistle of steam as his flaming body dripped over the rail and plummeted down the side of his epic podium. He was completely incinerated long before he had the chance to hit the throng of shields awaiting his fiery descent. And his people, the children of the stars, their eyes sucked from their heads and their skin bubbling, hurled themselves about in frenzied conflagration, the world they had created erupting around them in a nimbus glare that turned them into a molten sea. Their shields, misshapen now and crispy round the edges, dropped into the boiling human stew and were carried through the winding boulevards that the architect had so accurately counted and then drained away into the huge quarry pits like the juice of a volcano. It took a long time before the last of the enemy had oozed away, but it was the blink of an eye compared to the long years the slave had endured in the service of the king. When at last the terrible gurgling and sloshing sounds had died to little more than a distant simmer, he looked up. It had become evening, and the vengeful sun had travelled away from the cooking pot of the city, and so merrily the slave picked his way back down the hill and waited until the realm had cooled sufficiently enough for him to enter. Of the enemy, its king and his council, there was no trace other than a slight odour that the slave found strangely appetising, and an odd staining that discoloured the golden terraces. He made his way down to the dungeons deep below the shining citadel, and was relieved to find that his brethren were safe, and the drains, the pipes he'd had his workers painstakingly install, had swept the volatile detritus away from them. "Come, my friends," he said to the "Come, my friends," he said to the bedraggled survivors of his kind. "Let us return to our beloved city, for we have much to do. We must build again." Oh, well, that was a bit of an ordeal. Folks, that was Monument. As I say, that was published 2000, I think it was, in Volume 2 of Twisted Tales. There's 13 stories in that book. Volume 1 had 7, lucky 7. This was unlucky 13. Volume 3 was meant to follow. I did several stories for Volume 3, but I tragically, stupidly, but also quite justifiably walked out on the 3-book deal. And so Book 3 never happened. Book 3 could happen though. And I wouldn't mind getting all these stories republished. They're all dark, they're all twisted. Hence the title, Twisted. And but the majority of them are horror stories. But that was not a horror story. That was it was a sort of fantastical, odyssey. I hope you appreciated it. I hope you enjoyed it, despite the coughing, the stuttering, the stammering. It's not easy, There's plenty of authors, and I know several, who literally can go on stage and read out their work with characters and really fantastic voice, performance. And that's a gift. I can sit and talk in front of you guys. Oh, great. For hours on end. I can do movie commentaries. I can do all sorts off the cuff, It's difficult when it's set in front of you, and it's like a chore. It genuinely is a chore. That's not a pleasure to read that. It should be. I think the story's great. I like the story, apart from that opening paragraph. But you see now, that opening paragraph. Why I don't like it. And I've lost the sodding story again. Where the hell is it? Oh, come on now. Right. Throughout the ages, there have been peaceful times and there have been chaotic times. This happened during one of the darkest. But I think that was the kind of point that people have said to me with it. But no, you were foreshadowing what happened during one of the darkest, but it came one of the brightest. And I was like, oh yeah. I don't think I was really thinking that at the time. I don't think so. But it's one of those things when you write, some people have the ending in mind and they work backwards. I've done that as well. Some people just have a title. I'm going to work a story into, a title comes to them. I'm going to tell a story about that. So there's all different ways, different hacks and ways to get into writing stories or novels. But your opening lines, paragraph, should be a salvo which gets your reader, your audience hooked, makes them want to read further on, obviously. It's got to deliver something. So you can agonise too long and hard over that, staring at the blank page or the blank screen, just trying to get that first line. Just write any old shit. My advice, write any old shit, and then just you go back and change it all. Edit, do another draft and another draft, another draft. That's what it takes. Fine tune and hone it. There's other elements of that story I would change. I say I don't like that opening paragraph at all, but I kind of got stuck with it. There's other bits I'd probably change, but overall I quite like it. It enabled me to come up with a lot of different descriptive terms for things that glow, colours, brightness, the gleam, the shine of things. That's what it's all about. And it's a neat, silly little fable. The folly of an egotistical king, a bunch of bastards who subjugate a nation, and then they pay the price. Obviously, it works because they have long hot summers, and the slave, the architect, has worked it out. He's known, he's planned this all. Or you want gemstones and all this sort of stuff, agate, sapphire, Byzantine spires, you want all this gold and stuff, well, I've seen the way you raise your shields and point your swords up. I can work this out in the sun. And it's all like mathematics and physics and gemstone study. I'm going to cut this short because the cough's just going to ransack this now. But I hope you enjoyed it. There's more stories there to read out. This is not going to be the norm for the channel. Don't go thinking, oh, Kilt-Man's turned to a library channel. No. I don't want to just listen to him read stories out. He should be reviewing movies, opening boxes full of mystery gifts and all that, like playing music and showing us masks. No. I don't want books and stories read to me. I can do that myself. No, normal service will be the norm. Obviously, these are just gonna be little offshoots occasionally. But that became a bit of a, I don't know, a rod for my own back. After it failed dismally trying to read that out a few days ago, and then it failed again because of the bloody cough. And we got through it this time, but it literally was, I was getting, there's a bit of a phobia was being developed about reading that kin story out. And my tea's gone cold. Oh, it's alright. Cheers, y'all. Anyway, monument, citadel. Monument because it does get described in the story itself. It's a monument to the king's belief. It's also a monument to the architect, slaves, revenge, a great big shining edifice, a monument to egotistical power, narcissistic vanity, and imperious glory, and righteous revenge. But it could have been called Citadel as well, so, you know, is what it is. So at least I give you a little bit of reasons why the story developed the way it did. A bit of insight into my thinking at the time. It was many years ago. God, what was it? You're talking 25, 26 years ago I wrote that. So, and in fact all the stories in that book, and it's bigger ones and that, much bigger ones, which I, at some point, if you want me to, I'll read them to you as well. Anyway, folks, because this is I'm gonna collapse inside myself with an incandescent, throaty fury, of tickly dryness. It's a curse, I tell you, it's a curse. So I left the lens flare because it kind of ties in with the igniting of flame and fire and light and this hellish glow. So folks, halfway know shall be Kilt-Man. Please, in the meantime, this ever express yourself in between time. Please keep it Kilty, keep it Celtic. Don't point your shiny swords and shields at the sun. Don't do that in between time. So please keep it Kilty, keep it Celtic. I'm going to see you all. But do let me know what you think. It was broken. It was. If I was actually firing on all cylinders and this wasn't drying up on me, it'd be a lot better. Hopefully next time will be better again. We'll see.